I am Pegram Harrison. I'm delighted to welcome you here to the Saïd Business School for the latest in our series, Engaging with the Humanities, where we bring humanities content into the social sciences and particularly business building for the purposes of illuminating each perspective with the other. I'm also joined today by some colleagues from the musical profession who are professional musicians, and I'll introduce them individually soon in a minute. They will be helping me explore our theme for today, which is, one of our themes, which is synchronicity, how teams work well together, how they achieve synchronicity. And we will look at that through the lens of performing arts, and particularly ensemble musicians. I'd also like to make some other points, though, about the music that we've chosen for today, which I hope will seem interesting to any of you with a business background, but I also hope it will seem interesting to those of you without, because certainly one of the purposes of this series is to welcome people into the business school from outside, from anywhere, and to, in some ways, demystify what we do, but also to demonstrate that what we do with business isn't just all business. So I'm going to talk for a few seconds about an intriguing chap from Oxford. Well, he was educated here partly, and then went elsewhere. This man, Thomas Weelkes. Thomas Weelkes. That may or may not be a picture of him, but it's possibly a picture of him. He was born in, I think, Lincolnshire or Norfolk. I'm not quite sure where. I'm not sure anyone is. And eventually made his way to Winchester, where he, at a pretty young age, in his teens, was made organist of the school. And then shortly thereafter, organist of the nearby Chichester Cathedral. Now, this is a reflection not just of his skill, but of the rarity of his skill. So for a teenager to be made organist and choir master of two exemplary institutions wasn't quite that odd at that time. There just weren't that many people able to do the job. So right place, right time. That's some career advice for you. Then he made the gesture, and it probably was just a gesture, of getting a degree. He got his bachelor's in music from Oxford and from New College after taking up his appointment at Chichester. And armed with that, he had credibility, and he had a network that allowed him a certain degree of resilience for the rest of his career, because throughout the rest of his career, he misbehaved with increasing intensity. At the beginning, he seems to have been popular, much in demand as a musician, seems to have appeared in court at a crucial period towards the end of the Elizabethan era. He knew everybody, but by the end of the first decade of the 17th century, the early Jacobean period, he was beginning to come off the rails. And by 1608, he had stopped publishing, and by about 1613, 14, 15, he had clearly become an alcoholic. Now, I don't want to joke about such things, but it's interesting how strong a record there is of that. There's little record of him in many respects, but in this respect, quite a lot. And it's interesting because mainly he was disruptive. He ruined things for other people, while at the same time creating things that were so enticing, so fascinating, so innovative, so marvelous, and so influential that he was indulged. And though fired and rehired a number of times by Chichester Cathedral for all kinds of offenses, such as being drunk, swearing in the organ loft, and it's documented, urinating on the dean from the organ loft, which is really extraordinary, he nonetheless was always given another chance. And it's mainly because of the innovativeness and interest of his music. We're going to explore some of that music today and look at how it's not just a product of its time, but influential for what came afterwards, and how it represents other aspects of that time, a period of colonialization, globalization, and the very beginnings of what we now recognize as a capitalist system, and in that, the connection of business and the humanities, I hope, will become clear. Now, let's begin let's move now quickly to some music. I'm going to ask my colleagues to come up here. Here they all are. Will in the Scandinavian jumper, Florian in dark, Fleur in maroon, Laura in blue, Andy in navy, Tom in the blue jumper. They're all professional singers from Oxford, and they're going to help me demonstrate some points. Now, for the benefit of consolidation, Andy and Fleur, would you mind standing up on the risers? Florian and, actually, let me split you. No, you two are fine, yes. And sort of curve it a bit more. Yeah, that's good. So that's good. Okay, now, they don't know what we're about to sing. My first point is that these guys are good, and I can just hand them anything. Hand them something not exactly super challenging, given their skill and their profession, but it isn't easy. So this is a stretch target. I'm asking this team of people that isn't really a team. They've been assembled for this purpose. They've not been working together regularly to cohere around their expertise. So I'm giving them a challenge that I'm pretty sure they're all interested in, but not one that they've had time to coordinate about. They haven't been able to talk about it. They haven't been able to think about it. And you can see them now. Look at them, rapidly scanning what they're supposed to do and just basically deciding to more or less wing it because they know that I'm about to ask them to sing. Now, I'll show you what we're going to, well, I won't show you, but I'll give you a hint of what we're going to do. This piece is a madrigal. Some of you will know what a madrigal is. It's a secular piece of music. They were pioneered in Italy in the 1520s, 30s, maybe solidified a little later. The form came into England first in the 1550s and was well embedded by the time of this, which was about 1603, right about the death of Elizabeth and the coronation of James. And I want to talk about how those political and social changes reflect all kinds of interesting things and are encapsulated in this music. Now, you can see the words, and the title of the piece is this, Thule, the period of cosmography. It's deliberately peculiar. No one knows who wrote the words, but we have, hold on, I need to find my notes, okay. We have some sense that either it was Wilkes himself or possibly the Earl of Oxford, who is a putative collaborator or substitute for Shakespeare. And they're very, very fancy words. Look at this. Thule, the period of cosmography. Now, what that means, probably, well, it's a reference to a Greek and Roman idea about the edge of the world. Greeks and the Romans had various words for Northern Europe, or for the islands that they were pretty sure were beyond the reaches of their own navigational capabilities. And Thule, or even Ultima Thule, further than Thule, were possibly names for, at one point, Great Britain, or the British Isles, and then somewhat later, Iceland, and maybe even Greenland. This idea of something beyond the map and northern and exotic is embedded right in the first word of the lyrics and in the first note of the music. Now, going on, I'll talk about some of the interesting words that are in here and some of the interesting ideas that are embedded, not just in the words, but in the way they're encapsulated in music and what that means in a larger way. So, I'm going to ask the singers to begin. It is pronounced Thule. In Greek, it would be Thule, but who knows how the Elizabethans would have pronounced it. And then I'm gonna stop you. Well, how about this? Go all the way. Just go to the bar 20 for the soprano. So end when you finish the phrase "period of cosmography." Okay. So just that first page and a bit, 2 pages. All right. Just to prove to you how good they are, a little taste. Okay, it goes on, but I think that deserves some applause. Now, what they're singing is Thule, the period of cosmography. Thule, this island at the edge of the world, the limits of the known world. And the music encapsulates that a little bit by having each of the 6 parts singing, but also really spanning the span of the human voice. So we have very high notes from the sopranos and low notes from the basses and everything in between. Also, they're basically singing the same music, the same patterns, da-da-da-da-da, and long held notes on the word Thule. So there's this sense of universality and of oneness built in right at the start. Now, then it starts to get more interesting and more pictorial. So the words are weird. Doth vaunt of Hekla, we think what this means is, well, Hekla was, or still is, a volcano in Iceland. And it had been discovered some centuries before by the Vikings, but by this time was well known, and particularly so because it was erupting. From about 1597, Hekla was in a state of more or less permanent eruption that even people in Europe were aware of. An early indicator of globalization and perhaps of climate vulnerability. So Hekla was erupting right at the time that this piece was composed, and it's represented in the music in a very interesting way. Instead of making a loud kind of explosive noise, the music starts with each of the separate parts making little jumps on the words doth vaunt, which means is proud of Hekla. So doth vaunt of Hekla, little jumps first, and then medium jumps, and then much bigger jumps, and then finally a whole octave from one note to the same note, 12 steps up or 8 steps up. Now, even if you don't understand those technicalities, I'm going to ask the choir to sing the words of doth vaunt of Hekla, only those words, and stop when you're finished. And let's see if you can hear how, at the beginning, the jumps are small. Do, 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 do. But then soon they get do, do, much wider. That's the way this sense of an eruption is made tangible, I guess, or audible in the music. Doth vaunt of Hekla. Okay, now, let's do it again, and I'm going to ask you to do it slowly and see if it's audible. And make it as audible as you can by being super piano when you're not doing the jump. So just sort of from, let's say, from doth to vaunt, be loud, and any other syllable, be quieter. Okay, now, it's hard to hear, isn't it? But it's there. And in some ways, it doesn't matter whether you can hear it, because this music was written for them. One of the things that's significant about music of this sort and music of this sort around this period is that it's not really written for performance. It's written for consumption. In some ways, it was a product of the early growth of publishing, and also of social and transport networks that allowed manuscript copies of music to be disseminated more broadly. So starting in Italy and then spreading northward and then ultimately as far as England, music of this sort was for private consumption, private ensemble singing. And it didn't matter if an audience couldn't hear these special effects or couldn't hear them easily, because what matters most is the consumer who is also the performer. Now that's an interesting way of thinking about a product, one that doesn't really return into our thinking about economics until some 200 years later, when economics begins to become systematized as an aspect of social theory. But already in music, you can see an exemplification of these ideas of consumption and attention to the consumer that's done by making something interesting for someone who's inside of it, someone who owns it, and irrelevant to anyone outside. Okay, now there are other effects that are easier to hear for the public. For example, the next line, next phrase, whose sulphureous fire, is really visual. I'm going to ask the singers now to begin with whose and go through the phrase whose sulphureous fire and stop on the word fire. Okay, they can't stop, can they? Did you hear it? You can hear the fire. I mean, it's really visual. All that sliding along. Those are called melismas, and they're happening in thirds or other intervals where there's interest in how far apart the voices are. They're paired or tripled up with each other, and they create this sense of flames. It's very easy to see. That sort of effect is actually, it's called, all of this is called word painting, and Weelkes was a master of it. There are more examples. For example, the next phrase, doth melt the frozen clime. Just sing those 3.5 bars from doth melt the frozen clime and stop. Listen to, sorry. And, and listen to what happens on the word frozen. Doth melt the frozen clime. Okay. It stops. And on the word melt, it slows down. So let's do that again, from sulphureous fire through doth melt the frozen clime. And listen to this, the rapid change from the fire through melting to freezing. Okay, now this type of word painting, it's more than just a private amusement for the singers. There's something about a communication between the composer, the producer, and the consumer that's inherent in these jokes or these references or these challenges. It's as if Weelkes is speaking across a medium of exchange to people that he's now connected to. And he's making it worth their while by making it vivid, by making it challenging, but also by making it seductive. And soon, this whole metaphor of international exoticism will turn rapidly from the global stage to the individual stage, which we'll come to in a minute. We have to get through a few more little effects. So, for example, there's another phrase, Trinacrian Etna's flames ascend not higher. Now, that's an acknowledgement of Italy. Etna is in Sicily, and the madrigal has its roots in Italy. So Weelkes is acknowledging that heritage. But he's also saying that the volcano in Italy isn't any bigger than the one in Iceland, which is kind of a way of saying, up north, we're pretty capable too. It's veiled, but it's definite for the kinds of people, i.e. the consumers, that are up on all this, on the code, on the language of metaphor that's common in this type of performance. So Trinacrian Etna's flames ascend not higher. Then there's another joke. What would you expect the music to do on the word ascend? You would expect it to go up from lower to higher. And it does do that, but the words are saying ascend not higher. So the music goes up so high and then no higher. And then it actually slumps down at the end to indicate that the Italians are okay, but they've had their day. It's a subtle joke, but one that was not lost on Weelkes' contemporaries who commented on how vivid this word painting was beyond just the visual, and now also making a political statement. Okay, so let's see if we can hear that. Go from, let me point out one other bit of word painting worth listening to, which is the words thaw the sky. You can hear the reference to the sky as the music goes high, quite high and light, as if it clouds. And then after the thawing the sky, we'll have the ascend not higher, and then a little descent at the end. Okay, so let's go from, why don't we go from the sulfurous fires, just so you can have the full picture, and then we'll stop as soon as we get to the word these, so bar 49 or so. Don't go past the word higher.
Ascend not higher, ascend not higher, ascend not higher, ascend not higher.
Okay, pretty subtle, but it was a way of communicating with your market, with your audience, and it worked. And it behooves us, I think, to think back through the way people exchanged ideas and exchanged practices and even exchanged ideas of value through the medium of music and through the medium of music as consumed in the home and by people with skill, rather than always mediated through other layers such as the recording industry or a device. We have become so disconnected from the products of our own labor in an exact echo of a critique of capitalism that dates from the earliest of such critiques, Marx and Engels themselves. But before that, before the capitalist system really got going, or as it was just starting in this period, there's still that human connection with production and consumption that's so evident, not just in the narrative that the story of the words are telling, but the way that's embodied in the musical devices and the circumstances of their performance. Okay, now we're gonna come back to this. So we're gonna jump to the South. Perhaps if you just put it behind you on the thing and then hand yourselves around. This madrigal has two parts, the northern part, which we've heard some of, and also a southern part. The southern part is called the Andalusian merchant, the Andalusian merchant. And already right there's an imagery of the south, of Spain instead of Iceland, and very quickly, clarity about how there is a commercial context to this. It's a merchant. It's not just some geographical features that we're talking about, but rather a human activity trade. The Andalusian merchant returns with his ships laden with red dye stuff and porcelain from, in the case of the red dye, cochineal from the New World, Mexico. Cochineal was a red powdery dye made out of a particular type of insect that only grew on a particular type of cactus, but grew in such abundance or was extracted and exploited from Aztecs and other native peoples in Mexico to the point where it became the second most valuable export from Mexico into Spain after silver. And it was met with an equal amount of demand for red dye in Europe. That was just beginning at this point. So cochineal suggests a certain type of trade, exploitative, colonial, imperial, mercantile, and it's scarletly obvious. China dishes, we all know this story of the China trade. It was opened by the Portuguese and then immediately competed for and eventually won by the British somewhat later. But the Portuguese are represented here in the word fogo. That is an island in the Cape Verde Islands that was discovered or claimed by Portugal shortly before this in the 1590s. And Spain is represented by the word Spain. So the Spanish cochineal and the Portuguese China are here named, but also colored in. And the use of the word, I mean, my use of the word color is picked up in the composition. The music at this point, or even more so than in the other part, gets colorful in a musical way. It's not just vivid and exciting, but there's a type of harmony in music called chromaticism, which implies many things, but the word chromaticism derives from the Greek word for color. So the harmonies throughout this part of the madrigal become much more chromatic, much more colorful. And they're doing so literally to illustrate the color and all the associations of those colors, visual, musical, and commercial, that are given to us in the words. Now, chromaticism is, you kind of know it when you hear it. It's when the music sounds not so solid, but kind of wandering. You can't tell what the harmony is, or where it's going, or when it's about to stop and pause. For those of you that understand music, you'll know chromaticism. If you think of the keyboard on a piano, if you played every single note white and black, you're playing a chromatic scale. If you play a different sequence of notes and intervals, it's a different kind of non-chromatic scale. This music is, for a while, very, very chromatic to illustrate that point. And that's an aspect not just of economic commentary, but also of musical innovation. The madrigal was where chromaticism was first worked out and pushed and experimented on until it became, as it were, perfected, but then innovated again, and then tested and competed with, and then transferred to different places and audiences. It was the focal point of innovation in composition, and that, as we now know, also intersects with the questing economic activity of early imperialism, early capitalism, and of course of public and private consumption represented by these madrigals. So I'm going to ask you to just listen to the Andalusian Merchant, which our singers will now sing, and listen out for funny harmonies in this area. Also, listen out for the word fogo, because that represents another volcano. Instead of erupting like Hekla, it's like lava oozing. The chromatic harmony sort of slips and slithers up and down, and you'll probably be able to hear that. And then you'll certainly be able to hear the flying fishes, because they come jumping out of the texture of the music, flickety, flickety, flick, like you'd expect sparkling airborne fish to sound. And then we will get to a refrain about how wondrous it all is, and we'll come back and think about that after we've heard it once. So let's have the whole of the Andalusian Merchant at your leisure.
In Spain, pots in Spain, how strangely burnt, how strangely flying through the flames. These things seem wondrous, yet more wondrous, yet more wondrous, whose heart with fear doth freeze, whose heart with fear doth freeze, with love, 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 heart with fear doth freeze, whose heart with fear doth freeze, with love, with love doth thrive.
Well, first of all, it's a wonderful piece. It's spirited. Once you can see into it a little bit, the intricacy of its mechanics, it's even more interesting. But what's never lost in this kind of music is the emotion, is the human joy that comes out of it, the human longing that stays in it. There's a balance in here of technique and of passion that the music is very much about and very much wanting to embody. But there's also this dimension of economic and political significance that we can look back on from here and see from a certain distance and with a certain type of confidence, but that was not lost on the people of the time. The medium through which we see the world is hugely about modes of exchange, products, prices, competition. We live in a very economic world. So did they. It was even more so, really, in some ways, because so embodied in personal existence, in private life, and in private collective life. Now, the singers are not magic. They've pulled this off, singing something they've never seen before. I would bet most of them have never seen that piece before. Now, they've never sung together, they've never sung this sort of thing together, but they just did it. And it sounded marvelous, didn't it? And moreover, I'm sure some of you could notice, there was, once they got over the initial moment or two of figuring out the right tone and to start on the right pace and all that stuff, they started to relax and to really enjoy themselves. I picked up on some decorative moments. They've added stuff to this that wasn't there. And they're supposed to do that. They know enough about the style and they know enough about how each other sings, even if they don't know each other personally, to pull that together. Now, just a brief word on this before I come to my final points. This notion of ensemble, of how they come together, how they sing in such synchronicity, how does that happen? In a previous session like this, we explored that in a lot more mechanical detail, how you can hold on to parts of the music almost like a ladder and use the structure of the music to pull yourselves together as if by a scaffolding that you're all hanging on to, and you fill or clad to put flesh on the bones. And we demonstrated that with the aid of counterpoint and fugue, and particularly looking at a piece by Bach. In this case, while there's a lot of that going on, they understand the structural requirements and they all have the basic expertise to immediately figure that out and to conform to the accepted ways of doing that. But that's not what makes this music. If it were sung mechanically, it would sound bad. It wouldn't sound right. It just wouldn't be music. It wouldn't come off the page. It wouldn't come alive. It wouldn't be human. What makes this music music is the emotion. And while they can pull together in synchronicity with mechanical means, they also have to pull together in synchronicity with emotional means. And we all know that when you add emotions into a system, things, while they have the potential to improve, also have the risk of falling apart. You add emotion into a team or emotion into a process, and it will pull apart or try to pull apart the mechanics. That juggling act is, again, exemplified in the music, the way it alternates between fast and slow, high and low, tonal and modal, or harmonic and chromatically harmonic. There are contrasts built in, north and south, major and minor. In that constant oscillation of contrasts, there's a statement being made. But it's there also to support the idea that what matters most is the struggle, because out of that clash and uncertainty and imbalance comes innovation. No risk, no return, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Wilkes is really pushing at the boundaries of what music is and should be, and he's asking people to come together in a collective endeavor to help with this innovation, to make it real, not just theoretical, and to invest time and money in that process for the purpose of more than just selling copies, but of also achieving artistic and interpersonal gratification. We're going to sing one more piece, and then I'll give you the opportunity to ask the singers any questions you might have. And it's another piece that they don't know, that I'm going to hurl at them from afar, but I'm going to ask them to sing it in a way that brings out the word painting, some of the word painting for you to hear. I'll give you some visual aids. Well, some of you have the handouts, but I'll put them up here as well, so you can see where some of the word painting is likely to occur. But also to see if they can represent the emotionality as well as the technicality of the piece. Now, this piece was written right near the death of Queen Elizabeth, but it was meant to celebrate her reign, and it was written with a whole set of other pieces published around the same time in about 1601 or 2, right before she died in 1603. And it's meant to praise her. So the final phrase, "Long live Oriana," is a way of saying, "Long live Queen Elizabeth," who we all know is about to die. And there's a metaphor about how she has been the shepherdess of a flock. She has presided over this flock and also of the other shepherds, and made a pastoral economy one worth living in, a happy place, a prosperous place. Now, without going too much or more deeply into it, listen out for that sense of accomplishment that's in the music. A composer who really is in his stride, representing a monarch who has made a nation out of the chaos of a generation before, and done so by enriching it, by creating the conditions for trade and exchange that have put tiny little island at the edge of the map, the period of cosmography, into the center of a global economy for the first time in its existence. This piece is called "As Vesta Was from Latmos Hill Descended." And if you can get over the weirdness of the words, think a bit about Elizabethan England and its accomplishments in art, in commerce, and in a sense of what the individual human working in consort with others is capable of achieving. If you've got an extra. Also, listen out for, while they're having a quick look, listen out for some of the word painting. So, for example, in the first line, you'll hear music that goes down, and then you'll soon hear music that goes up. A bit later, we'll hear two people singing at the same time on the words 2 by 2. It's hard to miss it. And then we'll hear three people singing at the same time on the words 3 by 3. And then finally, one soprano, all on the top, all alone. Singers, when you get to your numbered bits, just raise your hand when you're singing so that it's really obvious. Okay. And then finally, the word "long live" at the very end is exemplified by the bass, who sings for a very long time underneath everybody else. He just holds a note and another note and marches up a scale with these long notes. So when our bass is singing those long notes, put up your hand, Florian, you'll probably be able to hear it anyway. So listen out for the word painting, but mainly just enjoy this last piece. And when we're done, I will thank you for your attention and welcome any questions. So please.
Three by three together, leaving the goddess all alone, hesitant hither, and mingling with the shepherds of her train, with the shepherds of her train. Then sang the shepherds and names of Diana, names of Diana.
Thank you, singers. It is an extraordinary thing to see that happen. And if you have any questions about how it happens or what they've sung, we're happy to answer them now. Please, over to you. There's one. There's a mic coming, if you don't mind.
When did you start to trust each other? Because I feel like it's very important that everyone's on the same path. And then if you are afraid of that, your colleague is not singing as the path as you are, like it might be a problem, right? So when did you start to trust?
I think for me it was probably about halfway through the final page. I was like, okay, phew. So what happened? Yeah.
I think on a fundamental basis, you have to trust your fellow singers before you even start, in a way. Oh, sorry. Yeah, as I said, before you even start, because you know you're sort of putting yourself on the spot, and if your sort of teammates don't, you know, tag along, as it were, or you know, play by roughly the same rules as you do, then it doesn't make any sense. So you kind of go in with a feeling of trust already, I'd say.
It's a really good point and a really good question, and one that's worth spending hours on. We don't have much time. But trust is so important to lubricate any type of human process. And we don't spend enough time learning how to develop it. But it doesn't come straight away, and yet it has to be there from the beginning. That's another one of those awkward contrasts that we've really forgotten to learn how to live with, but one that's very well represented in the idea of pulling together music like this. You got to trust in your fellows, but you also have to be vulnerable, and the music in its instabilities represents that really very, very clearly. Another question right here. You can wait for the mic.
Hi, hello. Can I just follow up from that? you were talking about decorative touches that came in and the kind of creativity. Can you say a bit more about how that works? Are there certain rules that you implicitly understand? Is it obvious who's going to do what? Is there a danger you're going to do something that's decorative in the wrong way?
So the music of this period is quite formalised in how it works. So although the individual composers will be doing different things, responding to the text differently, there are certain stylistic figures that are kind of universal to music written in this period. And at certain points, there are kind of the bare bones skeleton of the music, which you could then embellish, but it'll generally only be in one or two parts. But you can, it's a kind of common thing that you can feel between the parts, the kind of cadential figures, or certain, if you find you have one note and then a note much higher than it, at the time it's completely acceptable to fill in all the bits in between, even though on the page it might not look like that. But at any given time, there's probably only one person who has the kind of responsibility for doing that, because of the fact that everyone else might not be doing that, if that's a tautology.
I actually just want to link that back with the first question. So there are moments where it makes sense in somebody's part to put in a decoration, and that actually helps all of us to relax into working together, because you can hear, okay, they're in control enough to, like Andy's in control enough to know that he can chuck in an extra note here and there, and that, for me, it was like, okay, fine, he knows what he's doing, cool. Okay, that's one less person that I need to worry about. I can just get on with my thing and start to enjoy it together, so it becomes more playful. So I think it actually helps to build the trust when you allow yourself to play with it.
I couldn't have said it better. It's a key thing when you've got technical skill that you can display. It creates a sense of expertise that others perceive, and then they trust that excellence, and then they innovate further themselves. So it's a self-powering machine when it works, but it's done through what's fueled by this non-mechanical thing of stylistic excess. And this music really invites it. Other music doesn't. But it's typical of this period, that, again, that sense of pushing and of innovating within expected boundaries. There's one right there.
Thank you. That was a thrilling experience for me. Thank you for such lovely singing. Amazing. My question will be, what happens? I imagine all of you are equally highly talented. What happens when you put together people of different skills, and then you have to, because in the business world we don't always get to choose our team. People of different abilities will be part of the team, and how then we build trust. The trust more often than not breaks down. How do we then pull up people to the same level as others, and then build the synchronicity we want to develop? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I'll go back to the first question about trust. When the gentleman over here asked the question, my first response was, goodness, I only started to trust the team when I trusted myself, because I knew that the team here is of a sufficiently high quality that the stakes are high. And I felt like the weakest link. But it's a tricky question when you have a team of differing levels. I think the only solution in our industry is probably just that you need more time to put the thing together. As long as there's a feeling that the person who is the weakest link can get to a level beyond that which they set for themselves because of the encouraging conditions, to my mind, that's a success.
I think also with that as well, that the time is important, but the person who's maybe the strongest link also needs to feel challenged in a way, so that somehow you can have a rehearsal, say, that's going on for a long time in order to learn, people who aren't so confident to learn the music, but the stronger people can find something that they can be doing productively with that in the rehearsal as well, whether it be engaging on a slightly deeper level with certain aspects of performance, but it's somehow it's very difficult to cater with a mixed thing for all abilities. I think it's important that the stronger people, when it comes to music, don't feel that they're wasting their time, because it can be very disheartening and you end up performing much worse for spending longer doing it, I think.
Florian.
I was going to say that quite a lot of us work regularly with children who sing. So I work with children who sing, and I don't usually sing with them, but certainly Andy does. So you have you have children singing one of the lines, and you have adults singing all of the other lines, and actually that kind of, I suppose, illustrates the point that that's a place where you've got people of one ability who just aren't there yet, who are singing with people who know exactly what they're doing, and actually that works brilliantly, because children, when you put them in an environment with people who can already do a thing, learn from them, and it's just, you get that, and that's a really extreme example. And of course, you're talking about working with children, but actually, it's you do have an element of the people who are strongest at what they do, completely just help the others. I mean, often if you're singing on a part with somebody who perhaps isn't quite as quick at picking up the notes as you, has different strengths, so maybe sounds really good, but can't read it quite as quickly, couldn't stand up here and just sing it, you'll end up, you'll sometimes end up being the person who's reading the notes, going, this is how this goes, and actually they can pick that up much more quickly than if they were left by themselves, and bring in their strength, which is the sound. So you then have two voices blending together really well, and it just happens much more quickly than if they were doing it by themselves, I think.
Well, yeah, that's basically what I was going to say, which is that within this group, there are some of us who are stronger readers, some of us who have stronger more beautiful voices or stronger voices or whatever. There'll be some who are more experienced at singing this particular kind of music, whatever. But everyone's strength together makes it work. I'm not pointing anyone out in particular. Those things, by the way.
Yeah. Good, very fine questions, and they're all connecting. Do we have another one over here? No. Backing down. There's a question in the back row there. There we go.
Thanks. Hi, thank you so much for all of this. I just wanted to know a little bit about your tempo choice, like how you decided on that, whether that was decided among each other or whether there were directions, and how you interpreted that individually and communicated that to the group.
So I'm going to answer that because the first piece I started, and before we started, I had an idea. I thought, maybe this is all right. And then I had a moment, and this I suppose goes back to trust, where I went, actually, is this going to work for everyone? I didn't know the piece. I'd sort of obviously glanced through, but I didn't know whether someone in the group perhaps had a better idea, knew more how it was supposed to go. So I just sort of turned to everyone around me and went, any idea? And Tom sort of went, yeah, I think it should go like this. And Andy kind of went, yeah, something like that. And there was a sort of general kind of, yeah, I think let's just kind of go with that. I mean, I like to think it would have gone fine if I hadn't checked, but equally if I hadn't, I began it, so I'd be the one who set it, and there would either when everyone else joined in, they would have just gone, okay, this is what we're doing now, and it would have happened, or there might have been an embarrassing moment where someone sort of went, okay, we're going to have to try and change this because this isn't going to go quite right.
I think what Sophie did, even if she may knew it or didn't, is to by soliciting. Oh, Fleur, yeah. By asking the team, she sort of empowered us to make that decision together, and we felt engaged from the get-go. But there are certain conventions we could rely on.
And there's even another example where this sort of pre-agreement didn't happen, which is the last piece that we did. And I think we started it slightly on the slower side. And that kind of, dawned on all of us when we sort of had sung the first two bars. And then there was, with arrangements like these, it's always very flexible in terms of, we have an idea. Let's try if we can make it work, even though we have started the piece already. And that's exactly what happened after about two bars. So I guess that sense of, we can change things on the go, that's something that, fuels these and very much characterizes these things, yeah.
We have about 1 minute left in the hour, and it's gone past the normally scheduled time for this to end. Let me ask you a question. Would you like to hear one more piece? Yes. If you need to leave, please feel free to do so. But may I ask the singers, are you willing to sing Thule, our first piece, from beginning to end? All right, this is the piece that we didn't hear in full, and we offer it as our thanks for your attention. And again, please, if you need to leave, feel free. Enjoy Thule, the period of cosmography of Thomas Wilkes.
We feel